Hi, it's Penny here, and in this video we're going to be looking back at my reading for the first quarter of 2024. We're going to look at the best books I read, the worst books I read, a few stats, and especially important for me, I think, is I want to check in on my reading goals and see if we need to make any adjustments before we get too far off track. So let's start with the best books. I think the best way for me to do this is to split it up into textbooks, audiobooks, and graphic books. So for textbooks, my saving grace for Q1 has been my Cosmere reread. Especially, I reread the first two books in the Stormlight Archives, so The Way of Kings and Words of Radiance, and I really love them. They're so rereadable, and I picked up on so many things that I didn't on my first read through, which really validated my decision before I went into Rhythm of War to go back and reread those first three books. So I've done two, I've still got to do Oathbringer, and then actually probably not till the end of the year will I get to Rhythm of War, but still, I've really been enjoying that reread. And actually, not only a reread, there are some things in the Cosmere that I just had never got into. So I also picked up The Alloy of Law, the first book in the Mistborn Era 2, and Sixth of the Dusk. I keep saying that title wrong. I really enjoyed both of those. Probably Sixth of the Dusk slightly more, but I also enjoyed The Alloy of Law better than I thought I would, since I had heard a lot of mixed things about it, and I was a bit afraid that it was going to be a little bit too Western feeling. But actually, I don't think it feels too different in terms of setting to the original Mistborn books. I just think the stakes and the characters aren't quite at the same level, but still really enjoyed those two extra Cosmere things that I read. And then as well, my other favourite book or textbook that I read in Q1 is also a reread. So that's This Other World by A.C. Buchanan. So this is a sci-fi novella that I hadn't read in quite a while, even though I kept recommending it. So I decided I better go back and reread it. And I did still really enjoy it on a reread. I will say my main frustration with it is that it's just a short novella, and I really would have loved more of the story. We're following this older woman who is autistic, and she now lives on this alien planet and finds it to be a really comforting place because a lot of her oddities can be written off as her just being one of those strange humans. And she's found kind of her place working in architecture and training people in architecture. But there's also some weird kind of psychic things going on in this world, and she gets involved in this investigation of that. And the psychic stuff also kind of links into this conflict that they're having with a neighboring country. And it all comes together in a really interesting way. So if you want a really short little sci-fi that looks at war and connection between people, I do still recommend this one. Then for audiobooks, probably the best audio thing that I read would be Dark One Forgotten, also by Brandon Sanderson. He has been a major part of my Q1 reading, and I'm kind of feeling a little bit Sandersoned out at this point, but Dark One Forgotten is like a 6-part audio series. I mean, you get it as a single audiobook, but it's recorded like a podcast, and it's this young girl who's trying to investigate this violinist that just disappeared, and then everybody forgot that she disappeared, and so her and her friend are kind of going on this trip to try and figure out what happened to her and why did everyone forget her. So this is actually a spin-off to Brandon Sanderson's Dark One graphic novel series, so it has some fantastical elements, and I just really loved that meshing of a more contemporary true crime podcast type story with that fantasticalness. It is kind of written a little bit younger. The main characters are university students, and some of the jokes are a little bit juvenile at times, but I still had a lot of fun with it, and I found it really addictive, and I just couldn't stop reading it once I started going with it. Then as well, I did listen to the audiobooks of Red Country and Sharp Ends in the First Law World by Joe Abercrombie. Now these were not my favorite books in that series, but I do credit the audiobooks for me getting as much enjoyment out of these as I did, because the audiobook narration for these is actually amazing. Joe Abercrombie has a lot of humor in his works, and I think the narrator is really good at getting that comedic timing right. And as well, he does really good voice acting for all the different characters, and they're just really high quality audiobooks. Then the last best audiobook that I had for Q1 is a non-fantasy one, and that is The Dream Daughter by Diane Chamberlain. I guess this one is sci-fi adjacent. We're basically following this woman in the 70s who learns that she is pregnant and that her unborn child has some kind of heart defect, but then her brother-in-law comes to her and says that he actually knows how to time travel, and if she would just go to 2001, she would be able to get surgery that would help. So that's what she does. I will say for the first 50% of the book, it's pretty much just that, and this mother having a really traumatic time trying to deal with the health issues of her unborn child. It really isn't until probably more like 60% that things started to get interesting. And then I did feel like the ending was quite rushed as well. But the audiobook quality was solid, and I did really enjoy this book. Like, I felt emotionally invested the whole time. I will admit, the whole childbirth, pregnancy stuff, I just felt anxious and awful the whole time, but still emotionally engaged. Then my favorite graphic novels of the quarter, I have quite a few because I think graphic novels were going really well for me at the start of this year. So firstly, I think my most favorite thing of the year so far was The Cursed Princess Club by Lamcat. So you can read this on Webtoon, but it is now also being published in book form. It starts out just really whimsical and silly. We have these 3 princesses from the Pastel Kingdom, and they've been betrothed to the 3 princes from the Plaid Kingdom. But the youngest sister is not as stereotypically beautiful as the other 2. Like, the other 2 are the kind where they sing and birds appear or flowers grow all around them constantly. And then the 3rd one has like when you first meet her, she has like a possum gnawing on her head, and she's kind of got like dull green hair and slightly green skin. So the prince that's betrothed to her, the youngest prince, is not particularly happy about the situation. And as well, this youngest princess meets up with this Cursed Princess Club out in the forest where there's all these princesses who have different curses, and they kind of have this amazing friendship group and are really supportive of Gwendolyn, the youngest princess, as she goes through all sorts of struggles. Her sisters are also really supportive, and the father, like, the most amazing thing about this series is just the way the character development is done. So many characters I loved, some that I hated, so many twists and turns, and like near the ending there were so many callbacks to like things that had happened earlier that I thought were just like tiny little jokes, but actually turned out to be important plot points, and I just was so impressed with it. As well as it having like amazing wholesome lessons and being really funny and cute. Like, I just loved it. As well, talking about rereads, I reread the first 4 volumes of Monstrous by Marjorie Liu and Sana Takeda. So this series has amazing art, but I realized I hadn't reread it for quite a while, but I knew that when I reread it previously, I had understood the plot a lot more on that reread. This time, it was like reading a whole different book. I actually think maybe I've just gotten more practice at reading graphic novel type things, so I was able to pick up on a lot more, and maybe it helps kind of knowing the broad strokes of the story. But I really loved my reread of Monstrous, and if you like really beautiful art, like this style, and you also like quite a dark story, because we're following this girl named Micah who has this demon that kind of comes out of her, sometimes eats people, and also like a lot of different conflict between different races, like these ancient animal gods and these necromancer cats and these witches that like drain other people's energies, and they're kind of dealing with these magical artifacts. There's so much to it, and I love the atmosphere and the darkness to it, and like the brutality, but also there's like some characters that are really cute. It's just great. As well, I picked up Snowglass Apples, which I think is by Neil Gaiman and I want to say Colleen Doran. I should say it with confidence in case I'm right, but I might be wrong. Anyway, this is like a Snow White retelling, except told from the evil stepmother's perspective. The art is absolutely beautiful, and the twist to the story is just genius, and the way it's told with Neil Gaiman's kind of quite beautiful but also really dark writing style. Just a really great read, and if you like beautiful art and fairy tale retellings with a little bit of a twist, this is a quick read, so definitely worth it. Then lastly, we have Bug Boys by Laura Knetzger. I didn't write down any authors' names, which I'm now regretting. So I should have actually talked about this right next to Cursed Princess Club, because it's very similar in that it's this super cute and silly story with some really wholesome lessons in it. We're basically following these 2 bugs, Rhino Bee and Stag Bee, and they're just going out on different adventures and learning different things. I think the second volume had a little bit more in terms of tying the different stories together, and I will admit like some of the stories are better than others, but some of them were just amazing, and I love them. So if you want to read about some cute bugs having some little adventures and just being emotional and ridiculous, then you should get Bug Boys. Okay, now let's talk about the worst books that I read in Q1. I'll try to be quick with this though. So for textbooks, firstly, we have The Olympian Affair by Jim Butcher. This is the sequel to The Aeronaut's Windlass. So I did retry this in audiobook and I enjoyed it slightly more in audiobook only because I could ignore all the bits that I was bored by because it's just, I think I'm realizing that I don't really like these Victorian steampunk stories with that particular like Victorian feel and a big focus on like the airship militariness of it all. Don't care. I do really like the etherealists, the people who do magic in this world, and also the most amazing part is this like underground cat society. But when I picked up the physical book, I only made it about 20 pages and I just thank goodness for audiobooks, or I wouldn't have been able to continue. Then as well we have The Bone People by Kerry Hulme. This is a New Zealand part Maori author, and this is kind of a New Zealand classic that I was hoping to love. And in some ways I did love the beginning. It was written in such a strange writing style that almost felt in parts really magical, but in other parts it just kind of felt like bad writing. And then the overall story is about this woman who lives in this tower and she forms this friendship with this young boy and also his father. It turns out the father is abusing the son, and the way that that whole issue was dealt with I thought was awful. Maybe it would have come around in the end. Maybe it was trying to do a bunch of sneaky symbology things, but I just don't want to read about a 6-year-old child being physically abused. No thank you. I mean, maybe if the issue was being dealt with particularly well, it could be like a really emotionally harrowing story, but the way it was being dealt with, I just felt awful and confused and I didn't like it. Then for audiobooks, the lowest rated audiobooks that I have on my list are When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill and also The Atlas Complex by Olivia Blake. So When Women Were Dragons, I could see some people really liking this, but for me it was just a little bit too literary and particularly focused on this one young girl's experience of her family members turning into dragons when they get really angry or something. I think what frustrated me is I really wanted to learn more about these women that were turning into dragons and what happens once they turn into dragons. What do they turn back? What happens then? Like there were so many unknowns that I thought could have been really interesting to explore. Like even the feminist themes that it was trying to get into, I think could have been better explored if it had way more perspectives and like explored different aspects of this turning into dragons, but it wasn't that kind of story, and so I just kind of got bored. I did think the audiobook narration was okay though. For the Atlas Complex, I think I'd probably say the same. The audiobook narration was okay, and I can see that some people might really like this book or this conclusion to the trilogy, but I also know that a lot of people didn't, and I think it's just because the whole book was lacking in structure, and it was probably worse listening to it via audiobook because of course it's harder to keep track of the structure when it's just audio in your brain rather than memory of pages. And it's also easier for things to just flow by you and for you to miss the point when you're listening to an audiobook. So I do wonder if I would have enjoyed this whole series better if I'd read it physically or like as text, but I didn't like it enough to try. Then for my worst graphic novels that I read, we have The Darker Shades of Magic. I don't actually know what that graphic novel series is called. It was like a Darker Shades of Magic like prequel series. I had read the first volume a while back and I decided to continue. However, my reread of the first one didn't go well, and then the second one I ended up DNFing. I did have the third one from the library. I flicked through it, decided, yeah, I'm not going to get what I want from this series. I just think the way that it's written and the way that it's drawn is not to my taste. I found it really hard to follow the story, and I'm not really convinced that there's a decent story in there anyway. Then as well, we have The Promised Neverland, and I'm specifically going to call out volume 15 because there were some volumes earlier on that I really enjoyed, but the ones leading up to 15, I got quite bored. I didn't feel like we had a direction. I didn't feel like we had any momentum, and I decided the last 5 volumes of that series weren't really going to go anywhere that I cared about, so I DNF'd the series after volume 15. Okay, so I took much longer talking about all of those than I was planning to. So now let's quickly go through my goals and kind of look at my stats at the same time. So my first reading goal was to read 100 books with a stretch goal of 150. So in Q1, I've actually already read 56 books, which is a lot more than I need to read. However, I will note that 27 of those were graphic novel types things, which tend to be shorter and quicker to get through. So if I don't count those, then I've read 29 things, which is probably more in line with getting to 100 books, which makes sense because my theory is always 100 books is one physical book and one audiobook every week, which is how it normally works out because I have read 15 text things and 14 audio things. So I guess the summary is we're well on track to get 100 books and probably 150 once you include graphic things. Then I also had a bunch of lists of books that I wanted to make progress on. Firstly, we have TBR 0. I actually only have one book left on my physical TBR. There are some other books on my bookshelves that I haven't read, but for reasons that I've decided on, I'm not including those. So only one more book, and it's actually on my April TBR. So very soon, I'll be at least technical TBR 0. Maybe not true TBR 0, but who cares? I'm counting it anyway. I also wanted to get up to series 0, which would mean I have caught up on all the series that I'm reading, like either they're completed series and I've finished them, or they're uncompleted series and I've read all the books that have been released. So at the end of Q1, I had 15 books that I needed to read to be all caught up on series. And I think I should be able to get through about half of those in April. So I think I'm making really good progress for series 0, and I'm really looking forward to very soon being able to start some new series. In fact, I've already started some new series, but soon I'm going to start even more. I am always going to make sure that whenever I start a new series, I always have a plan to finish it or catch up on it. But whereas my series list used to feel really overwhelming, now I look at it and I know I have a plan, and it just feels so great. I also wanted to get my Goodreads want to read list down under 100 books. To be honest, I've already done this. I think I had it at about 136-ish at the start of the year, but then I read a few books off it. Did I write down how many? No. But also, because I've been struggling to find some of the books on that want to read list at my library when I want to read them, I decided to go through and actually match up all the books on that list with their availability at the library, either as a physical book or an audiobook. And from that, I realized that some of the books on that list were just not going to be ones I could get through the library. And when I looked at them again, I realized I wasn't interested enough in reading them to actually pay for them. So I took some off the list, and now I have 99 books on my want to read list. So I'm going to, at the end of the year, count that goal as a win regardless, but I might try now to try and get it under 60. Is that doable? I did some basic maths. Maybe I should make it easier. Maybe I should say under 75. That could be the next milestone we go for. Then lastly, I had my list of 2024 anticipated releases. To be honest, I've only read the Atlas Complex so far, which you know how that went, not well. Most of the others that have come out so far, I have holds on at the library, and I'm just waiting. It always takes a while for my library to get a lot of new releases, so we have to be patient. And I'm still so thankful that I can get these through the library, because I just would never be able to buy all of the new releases that I want to read. Okay, then my next reading goal was that I wanted to have more favorite books that I could rave about. And I specifically had an idea of the rating distribution that I wanted, which I don't think I'm quite achieving, but maybe we're close. So I've got my computer here. I wanted less than 5% 1 and 2 stars. And in Q1, I got 9%. So that's a few too many. But I think a lot of those were me trying to finish off series that maybe I should have DNF'd. So I think we can improve on that just by the fact that a lot of those series are behind me now, and let's not pick up series that I'm not expecting to love. I'm not worried. I've been doing a bunch of things to create prioritized series lists, so I'm pretty confident in picking up a lot of things I expect to love for the rest of the year. I also wanted to have less than 25% 3 stars. So in Q1 I had 30%, which is a bit too much. So then with maths, I wanted to have more than 70% 4 and 5 stars. Let's say 59%. It's a little bit, low, but it's still not bad. Still, only 9% 5 stars. I did readjust my rating scales, so I should be giving out more 5 stars. So that was my goal. I'm kind of falling behind on it. I had some tactics though for how to achieve this. So firstly, my first tactic was that I wanted to read 75% at least adult novels. I don't think I'm doing this one either. Let me check. So 57.3 adult books. I think a lot of this though was that a lot of those graphic type things that I've been reading, like The Promised Neverland and The Cursed Princess Club, I counted as YA because I feel like that's a true demographic of them, even though they totally can be read by adults as well. But I think because of a lot of the graphics, my YA books is much higher. I can also see my YA books are rated the lowest, so I need to try and pick up more adult books for the rest of the year, which I think is my reading plan, so maybe we'll be okay. I also had a list of priority series that I knew I was excited to read and I'm expecting to give 5 stars. So I haven't gotten to any of these yet, mainly because I was trying to finish off series before I did that. So I'll probably start getting to those in May and hopefully we'll see like a dramatic uptick in my ratings at that point. Oh, and I also wrote here that I wanted to do more try a chapter type videos to work out what books I was really excited for. So I've already done one of those, which should be up next week, and I think I'm going to continue doing like one of those a month, so hopefully those will lead to me having a bunch of books that I'm super hyped to read, and hopefully being hyped to read all these books will eventually lead to more 5-star books. So I've made progress on that. Also, my last technique was to like 1 and 2 stars, they should be DNFs. I think I've mostly done that, the only exceptions being The Darker Shades and The Promised Neverland graphic novels, where when I decided to DNF the series, the last books that I read in those series, I did rate 1 or 2 stars, but the actual volumes I didn't DNF because graphic novels are so short, you know? So by the time you decide to DNF them, you may as well finish them because you're at the end anyway. Oh, my last tactic for increasing ratings was I just didn't want to read any memoirs because I didn't like any of the ones that I read in 2023. So that's an easy one. I've done that. Then lastly, I had a couple of stats goals. Firstly, I wanted to be reading less than 70% white or European authors. So if I have a look, I'm currently at 68%, which ticks that goal off. I will say I think the main reason that that's as high as it is because of all the Promised Neverland volumes that I read, and maybe also a lot of other graphic type things. And now that I've DNF'd the Promised Neverland, I need to make sure that I'm still picking up other books by non-white authors. I have on my library list that I put together, I did go through and add like another check mark for POC authors, and hopefully that will mean that I can kind of take note of those and prioritize picking those up when I'm picking books off that list. But I'm actually surprised that I'm doing this because I haven't really put that much effort into it yet. Actually, that includes April. If I take out April, it's only 57%, which I think shows you that April we're going in the wrong direction. But for Q1, actually we did quite well. But again, I think it's mainly The Promised Neverland and some other graphic type things. And I would probably like to do a better job at picking up more diverse, like non-graphic things. Then lastly, I also wanted to be reading 10% or more science fiction books because I haven't been picking up much science fiction and I would like to pick up more. In Q1, I only made it to 7.3. I do know there's some sci-fi series I'm hoping to pick up later in the year, but I wonder as well with this whether I should be going through that library list I've got and also like marking the ones that are sci-fi so I can try and prioritize those. I think that's what we need to do. Okay, so I am losing my voice, so I think that's going to be the end of Q1. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I talked about earlier in the video because I would love to chat with you about those down in the comments, or let me know what the best books are that you read in Q1 or the worst books. And also let me know how you're going with your reading goals. Do you also need to make a few little adjustments? Do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well and I will see you next time.